Ever imagine the most powerful man in the world, the guy with nuclear launch codes, once had a paper route?
It's almost hard to imagine, right?
It's Donald Trump for you. Kid with a paper route, driven around in a Cadillac by his dad when it rained. It's just a glimpse into the wild ride that is his story. Today we're diving deep into the life and times of Donald Trump.
Buckle up.
We've got Wikipedia, some insightful YouTube videos, even Encyclopedia Britannica trying to paint the full picture.
It's quite the story.
Yeah.
It's like solving a puzzle, right? You've got all these pieces, the facts, the events, the controversies, and we're putting them together to understand the man behind the headlines. Not taking sides, not getting into political debates,
Right.
just trying to understand how he got here.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with his early life. We know his father, Fred Trump, was a huge deal in real estate.
Right.
Discipline was his middle name, even sent young Donald to military school.
Oh, yeah. Strict disciplinarian for sure.
But yet there's this story about the paper route.
Yeah.
Fred made Donald work at rain or shine. But when it rained,
Cadillac chauffeur. Gotta love it.
that's quite the mixed message. Hard work, but with a silver spoon. You can see how those contrasting forces might have shaped Donald Trump's approach to business and leadership.
Absolutely. It's like he learned to hustle, but also expected a certain level of privilege, and you see that play out in his early business ventures. He followed in his father's footsteps, starting with real estate investments while he was still in college.
And then jumped into the family business full-time. But even then, things weren't exactly squeaky clean.
Far from it.
There were those lawsuits alleging racial discrimination in their housing developments.
Yeah, multiple complaints about discrimination against black tenants and other minorities. In 1973, the U.S. Justice Department even sued Fred and Donald Trump and their company for violating the Fair Housing Act.
Oh, wow.
A big deal.
They settled, agreed to rent more apartments to black tenants, but never admitted any wrongdoing. And these kinds of legal challenges followed the Trump organization for years.
Dogged them for a while, yeah.
But amidst all that, Donald was building his empire. Moved to Manhattan, and things really started to take off.
The Big Apple.
You've got the Commodore Hotel, which became the Grand Hyatt Trump Tower, all these big projects.
Iconic.
He was renovating, building, and establishing himself as a major player.
Big time.
Even tried his hand at the airline industry with the Trump shuttle. That's ambitious, to say the least.
You can't knock his ambition, right?
No.
It makes you wonder, was he a brilliant businessman, or were there some questionable tactics at play? Think about the controversies over tax exemptions, financial dealings, and even those allegations of connections with organized crime.
It's a complicated picture.
It is.
But on top of all the business stuff, he was crafting this larger-than-life media persona.
Oh, yeah, he knew how to work it.
The Art of the Deal. His co-authored book was a big part of that.
Huge bestseller.
It painted him as this self-made, wildly successful entrepreneur. And then came The Apprentice, the reality TV show that launched him into a whole new stratosphere of fame.
It's amazing how he understood the power of media,
Totally.
how he used it to build his brand.
Yeah.
But did that reality TV persona help or hinder his political aspirations?
Well, even before his 2016 campaign, he was flirting with the idea of running for president. Remember when he joined the Reform Party back in 1999?
Yeah, that was a while ago.
And then there was that birtherism conspiracy theory he promoted about President Obama.
Yeah, that was a turning point. It showed he was willing to exploit controversy, tap into people's anxieties to gain political traction.
Wow.
And that, combined with his populist message, fueled his successful 2016 campaign.
So how did Trump, with his unique style and often controversial statements, actually win the 2016 election?
Think about the political climate at the time. There was this deep well of anti-establishment sentiment brewing. People were frustrated. I felt like the political elite wasn't listening to them.
They felt forgotten, like the system wasn't working for them anymore.
And Trump, with his outsider status and drain the swamp rhetoric, became this symbol of change. His message delivered through Twitter and those massive rallies resonated with a lot of people who felt unheard.
He was a master of branding and self-promotion, kept himself at the center of the conversation, no matter how controversial.
Oh, for sure. He knew how to create a spectacle. But we also need to acknowledge that his campaign was rife with false and misleading statements. Fact-checkers documented thousands of them.
Let's not forget about the allegations of Russian interference in the election.
Right. The U.S. intelligence community concluded that the Russian government had interfered to try to help Trump win.
Oh, wow.
It was a chaotic campaign, to say the least. But against all odds, he became the 45th president of the United States.
And that's when things really got interesting. From his first days in office, he was making headlines. The travel ban, the family separations at the border, the government shutdown over funding for the border wall.
His presidency was a whirlwind.
It was.
Executive orders, policy shifts, legal battles. He challenged norms and sparked intense debates on everything, from immigration to executive power to political strategy. His approach to the COVID-19 pandemic was incredibly contentious, too.
I remember.
He downplayed the threat, initially promoted unproven treatments.
And then there were the impeachments twice by the House of Representatives.
Unprecedented.
First, for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress related to Ukraine, and then for incitement of insurrection for his role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
It was a turbulent and divisive presidency, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And its impact on American politics and society will be felt for a long time.
So let's break down some of the key events of his presidency. We need to understand the context, the implications of his actions. His presidency, for all its controversies, has undeniably shaped the political landscape we see today.
Absolutely. Where do we even begin? Immigration was a central issue from day one. He campaigned on building a wall, cracking down on illegal immigration, and he followed through with some pretty extreme measures.
Right, like that travel ban that restricted travel from several Muslim-majority countries. It sparked outrage, legal challenges, accusations of religious discrimination.
Went through several revisions, ultimately partially upheld by the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Then there was the zero-tolerance policy at the border, separating thousands of migrant children from their parents.
Oh, it was just a humanitarian crisis. Images of children in cages were all over the news, and there was international condemnation.
Yeah, it was really bad. He eventually signed an executive order ending the separations, but the trauma inflicted on those families is still being felt.
It's hard to imagine going through that.
And let's not forget about the border wall. He insisted Mexico would pay for it, but that never happened. His demands for funding led to the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, causing chaos and economic hardship. In the end, only a small portion of the wall was built, and its effectiveness is still debatable.
Yeah, it was a big campaign promise.
It was.
His immigration policies were incredibly divisive. They raised fundamental questions about American values and the rule of law, and they continue to shape the immigration debate today.
Absolutely. Now shifting gears to his economic policies. He came into office promising to boost the economy, bring back jobs, and he pushed through some major changes.
Like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, for example. It slashed taxes for corporations and individuals. He also rolled back regulations on various industries, arguing it would stimulate economic growth.
Right, but the effects of those policies are complicated.
Yeah.
On the one hand, the economy did see gains during his presidency, low unemployment, a strong stock market.
Right.
But critics argue the tax cuts mostly benefited the wealthy and corporations exacerbating income inequality.
Right, and they point to the rising national debt and the potential long-term consequences of deregulation.
Exactly.
His trade policies were also very disruptive. He slapped tariffs on goods from China and other countries, sparking trade wars and creating uncertainty in global markets.
He renegotiated trade deals like NAFTA, claiming he was getting a better deal for America. But these moves also alienated allies and disrupted long-standing trade relationships. So his economic policies, like his immigration policies, had a mixed legacy with both positive and negative outcomes.
And the long-term impact on the American economy is still playing out.
Yeah, we're still seeing the effects.
Now let's move on to foreign policy.
He campaigned on an America First agenda, putting American interests above all else. Pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, the Paris Agreement on climate change.
Wow.
He also took a much more confrontational approach, with allies demanding they contribute more for their defense.
And his relationship with Russia was especially scrutinized, given the allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 election.
Yeah, a lot of questions there.
He met with Putin on several occasions, but their relationship was often tense and shrouded in mistrust. His foreign policy was unpredictable, often contradicting traditional American diplomacy. He alienated allies, emboldened adversaries, and contributed to a more volatile and uncertain global landscape. And the repercussions of his actions are still being felt on the world stage today.
For sure.
One of the most defining moments of his presidency, of course, was his response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, yeah, that was a huge test.
It was. Initially, he downplayed the threat, called it a hoax, predicted it would just disappear. He resisted calls for social distancing mask mandates, arguing they were unnecessary and an infringement on individual liberties.
Yeah, I remember that.
He even promoted unproven treatments like hydroxychloroquine, despite warnings from health experts.
And his administration was widely criticized for its handling of the pandemic, particularly the slow rollout of testing and the shortage of medical supplies.
Right. The U.S. ended up with a surge in cases and deaths, becoming one of the hardest hit countries in the world. Trump himself contracted COVID in October 2020, just weeks before the presidential election.
It was a chaotic time. His response to the pandemic with its misinformation and rejection of science was condemned by many. It further divided the country, eroded trust in public institutions, and undoubtedly had a significant impact on the 2020 election.
Speaking of which, that election was one for the history books.
It was.
Contentious, consequential, and held against the backdrop of the pandemic and widespread social unrest. It was a highly charged atmosphere, to say the least.
That's all it was.
Trump repeatedly claimed there would be voter fraud, that the election would be rigged even before it took place. It was like he was laying the groundwork to challenge the results, regardless of the outcome.
And when Biden was declared the winner, Trump refused to concede. He launched a barrage of legal challenges, continued to make unfounded claims of widespread voter fraud.
It was an unprecedented assault on the democratic process.
It really was. His efforts to overturn the election results were ultimately unsuccessful, but they further polarized the country and damaged faith in democratic institutions.
And it all culminated in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
A dark day for American democracy.
It was. A mob of his supporters, fueled by his rhetoric, stormed the Capitol building in a violent attempt to disrupt the certification of Biden's victory. It was a shocking and terrifying attack on American democracy, a stark reminder of how fragile our system really is.
Absolutely.
And it solidified Trump's legacy as a divisive and polarizing figure.
But even after facing widespread condemnation for his role in the January 6th attack, he remained a powerful force within the Republican Party. He continued to hold rallies, make media appearances, and maintain his grip on a loyal base of supporters.
He never ruled out another run for president. In fact, he hinted at it repeatedly.
He did.
And that set the stage for what can only be described as a political comeback for the ages.
After a period of relative quiet, he announced his candidacy for the 2024 presidential election. He was back in the spotlight, seeking to reclaim the White House.
And the nation watched, wondering what this next chapter in the Trump saga would hold.
So let's dive into this comeback story. How did he, despite all the controversies, the legal battles, manage to retain his hold on the Republican Party and ultimately win the 2024 nomination?
It's incredible. It's like he tapped into the same anxieties and grievances that got him elected in 2016. The economic insecurity, the fear of cultural change, the distrust of elites and institutions.
He positioned himself as the champion of the forgotten man, again, the voice of the silent majority, who feel ignored and marginalized by the political establishment.
And he was helped by a divided and fractured opposition.
Right. The Democratic Party struggled to present a unified front, and their message didn't resonate with voters who felt left behind by globalization and technological change.
And Trump exploited those divisions. He painted the Democrats as out-of-touch elitists and continued his relentless attacks on the media, accusing them of bias and spreading fake news.
That strategy further eroded trust in traditional sources of information. It created an alternate reality where his pronouncements, no matter how outlandish, were accepted as truth by his supporters.
And then there's the Republican Party itself. Many Republican leaders, initially wary of Trump, eventually fell in line, fearing his wrath and a potential backlash from his base.
They embraced his populist agenda and downplayed his transgressions, choosing party unity over principle.
It created a political environment where he could operate with impunity unchecked by his own party. And that paved the way for his return to power.
Now he's facing a new set of challenges as he embarks on his second non-consecutive term. He's older, battling multiple legal issues, and inheriting a deeply divided nation facing a mountain of problems.
But one thing hasn't changed. His unwavering belief in himself, his ability to bend reality to his will. He's a master of self-promotion, a shrewd manipulator of public opinion.
And he's weathered countless storms, emerging seemingly unscathed from scandals that would have sunk other politicians.
What does this mean for the future of America? It's the question on everyone's mind.
Only time will tell how this next chapter in the Trump saga will unfold. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a fascinating, if not unsettling, ride.
It's a story that continues to captivate and confound, a testament to the power of personality and the complexities of American politics.
And it's far from over.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from his upbringing to his business ventures, his media persona, his tumultuous first term, and his improbable comeback.
But to grasp the full significance of his return to power, we need to dig into the forces that have shaped his journey, the anxieties he so effectively exploited.
Let's go deeper into the underlying factors. The societal shifts, the cultural anxieties that have allowed a figure like Trump to rise to power.
Because this isn't just about Trump himself, it's about what his rise tells us about the state of America, the challenges facing our democracy.
It feels like Trump's treatment of and comments about women have been a constant throughout his life, long before he even considered politics.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. From his days as that brash real estate tycoon to his time on The Apprentice, there's a pattern of behavior that's hard to ignore.
There are so many examples. The way he objectified women, rating them based on their looks. The infamous grab them by the bip comment caught on tape.
And the multiple allegations of sexual assault and harassment from numerous women.
That's a lot.
Trump has denied all these allegations, but they've definitely cast a shadow over his career and presidency.
And it goes beyond his personal conduct. His policies have had a real impact on women, too.
Think about his administration's efforts to roll back access to reproductive health care, like defunding Planned Parenthood, and appointing conservative judges to the Supreme Court, which ultimately led to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortion.
He also made it harder for women to report sexual harassment and discrimination. It's like his actions and rhetoric emboldened misogynistic attitudes, created a climate where women feel less safe, less empowered.
It's a crucial part of his legacy, and we can't turn a blind eye to it as we consider what his return to power means. What does his second term hold for women's rights and equality?
Will he continue to push policies that restrict their freedoms, undermine the progress they fought so hard for? Or will he change course, acknowledge the concerns of women who have been so vocal in their opposition?
Only time will tell. But his relationship with women is undeniably a complex and contentious issue, one that will continue to shape the political landscape.
So here we are at the end of our deep dive into the world of Donald Trump. I'm left with this mix of awe and unease.
I get it.
Awe at his ability to defy the odds, to play the media like a fiddle, to connect with a segment of the population on such a gut level.
And unease about what his return to power might bring the potential consequences for our democracy, our values, our future.
Right.
He embodies the contradictions of our times. He reflects the anxieties and aspirations of a nation grappling with massive change.
Love him or hate him, Donald Trump is a force to be reckoned with. He's a figure who has and will continue to shape the course of American history.
His story, with all its drama and controversy, is ultimately a story about us. About the choices we make, the values we hold, the future we want to build for ourselves and the generations to come.
That's something for you to think about as we navigate this new political era. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.